Little Oars Jr. All right, let's talk about Little Oars Jr. This guy stands at 60 meters tall. That's about 197 feet. To put that in perspective, that's literally 3 times taller than a regular giant in one piece. When a normal giant is already considered massive in this world, Little Oars Jr. makes them look like children. The nickname Little is honestly the most disrespectful thing you could call this absolute unit, because the only reason he's called that is because his ancestor, the original Oars, was even bigger. Little Oars Jr. wasn't just some random monster causing chaos. He was actually a captain of his own crew, the Little Pirates, and more importantly, he was a subordinate under Whitebeard. This giant had genuine loyalty and friendship with Ace, which is what brought him to Marineford during the war. Let's talk about what this guy could actually do, because his strength was genuinely terrifying. He was picking up marine battleships like they were toys and throwing them around like frisbees. We're talking about massive warships that normally take hundreds of men to operate. He even picked up one of Whitebeard's paddle ships and threw it into the plaza just to help his allies get through the defenses. Besides, his durability was insane. He took cannon fire from multiple marine battleships, and he barely flinched. Then he faced 3 of the 7 warlords of the sea. We're talking about Doflamingo slicing his leg, Moria messing with him, and Bartholomew Kuma hitting him with an Ursus shock. That attack finally brought him down, but even then, he got back up. The man refused to quit because Ace was still in danger. He fought through vice admirals, destroyed marine artillery positions, and kept pushing forward despite taking damage that would have killed most characters instantly. Some people say he was just a meat shield or a distraction, but I'd argue he was one of the most effective forces on the battlefield that day. Oars the Continent Puller. Now we need to talk about the legend himself, Oars the Continent Puller. This monster stands at 67 meters tall. When Zoro and Frankie first saw his body, they literally thought it was a wall. A wall. The name Continent Puller. This guy earned that name over 500 years ago by being so ridiculously strong that legends say he could literally pull entire continents. Whether that's actually true or just exaggeration from ancient times, we'll never know for sure. But the fact that people even believed it was possible tells you everything about the kind of terror Oars brought to the world. Here's where the story gets wild. Gecko Moria found Oars' corpse and turned him into zombie number 900 of his army. But Moria didn't stop there. He implanted Luffy's shadow into this ancient monster, which means Oars came back with all his original monstrous strength plus Luffy's combat instincts and personality. That combination created something that was honestly terrifying to watch in action. Let's break down what zombie Oars could actually do. When he first woke up, he was chained down with absolutely massive restraints, meant to hold something of his size. He stood up and the chains just exploded. Later on, he punched through a thick steel freezer with one hit, moved Thriller Bark's giant rudder by himself, which is basically steering an island-sized ship, and then casually ripped a tower off its foundation to use it as a club. Despite being this massive, he was fast, like genuinely fast. He could leap into the air and land surprise attacks before opponents could react. The Straw Hats kept dodging and attacking, but every time they thought they had an opening, Oars would just speed blitz them with movements that shouldn't be possible for something that size. But the most terrifying aspect of zombie Oars was his durability combined with his inability to feel pain. The Straw Hats hit him with everything they had, and he just kept getting back up. It took the entire crew working together, multiple combined attacks, and finally Luffy shattering his spine to actually stop him. Even then, you got the sense that if his body was still physically capable of moving, he would have kept fighting. Dragon number 13. This is a 70-meter-long dragon. We're talking about something longer than 2/3 of a football field that can fly, breathe fire, and has scales hard enough to tank Luffy's punches like they're nothing. This was a weapon that Vegapunk himself created to guard Punk Hazard. Vegapunk, the smartest scientist in the entire One Piece world, looked at all the options available to him and decided that a massive fire-breathing dragon was the most effective security system for his research facility. The world government was so confident in this dragon's abilities that even after they abandoned Punk Hazard, they just left him there to keep doing his job. Now, this dragon survived the island's catastrophic fallout that covered everything in poisonous gas. He lived through the 10-day battle between Akainu and Aokiji, 2 admirals whose fight literally split the island in half and permanently changed its entire climate. Dragon number 13 just adapted and kept on living in the Burning Lands for 2 years straight, guarding his post like nothing happened. Let's break down his actual combat abilities because they were no joke. His primary weapon was breathing massive streams of fire that could incinerate most opponents instantly. But what made him really dangerous in a fight was his aerial mobility. He could fly at speeds that made it incredibly difficult for people on the ground to track him or counterattack effectively. His defensive capabilities were just as impressive. Those scales covering his body were hard enough that Luffy's punches, which can shatter stone and metal, just bounced right off. When Zoro tried to cut him, the dragon's teeth were strong enough to clash directly with Zoro's swords without breaking. The only real weak point was his underbelly, which makes sense from a design perspective. But good luck getting underneath a flying dragon that's actively trying to burn you alive. Wadatsumi. He's an 80-meter-tall tiger blowfish fishman. To put this in perspective, he's the same size as the head of Surume, the kraken. When he's standing next to Shirahoshi, who is already a giant-sized mermaid, she looks like a normal person. That's the scale we're dealing with here. What makes Wadatsumi genuinely terrifying is that he combines his massive size with the natural advantages of being a fishman. He can breathe underwater, survive at depths of 10,000 meters below sea level, where the pressure would crush almost anything else. And he has the inherent strength that comes with being a fishman, which is already 10 times stronger than a regular human at baseline. Now multiply that by his enormous size, and you get something that can punch sea creatures multiple times larger than the Thousand Sunny, and send them flying with casual effort. His combat abilities are legitimately insane. He can pick up and throw entire buildings like they're toys. When the Straw Hats were escaping from Big Mom's territory, Wadatsumi burst out of the ocean in the middle of her fleet, and the shockwave alone sent multiple ships flying through the air. But here's where it gets even crazier. As a tiger blowfish fishman, Wadatsumi can inflate himself, which means he can become even larger than his already massive base size. When he took an energy steroid, which temporarily boosts a fishman's strength, he one-shot Surume, a kraken that had been shown to be incredibly powerful. Sanjuan Wolf. This man is 180 meters tall at minimum. To put that in actual perspective, he's roughly the same size as the entire Marine headquarters building at Marineford. When he showed up during the war, people thought he was part of the architecture until he started moving. He makes oars in Little Oars Jr, who we already talked about as being impossibly massive, look like action figures standing next to him. Here's what makes Sanjuan Wolf genuinely horrifying from a lore perspective. His crimes were so terrible that the world government didn't just execute him. They locked him in level 6 of Impel Down, the deepest level where they keep prisoners whose very existence needs to be erased from history. Think about what kind of destruction someone his size could cause if they actually wanted to. A single step could level buildings. A punch could destroy an entire district. The world government looked at this giant and decided the safest option was to pretend he never existed, rather than risk him ever getting out. Then Blackbeard showed up and freed all the level 6 prisoners. But here's the part people forget. Blackbeard made them fight each other in a battle royale, and only the strongest survivors got to join his crew. Sanjuan Wolf won. He fought against some of the most dangerous criminals in One Piece history, and came out on top, which earned him a position as one of the 10 Titanic captains. That means he's legitimately one of the strongest fighters in the Blackbeard Pirates, commanding an entire ship and crew under his authority. Despite being literally the size of a building, he somehow snuck up on Marineford without anyone noticing, until he was right behind the Marine headquarters. How does something that massive move without being detected? The fact that he has that level of stealth despite his size suggests there's way more to his abilities than we've seen so far. We know he has a devil fruit that contributes to his size, but the full extent of what he can do is still a mystery, and that's honestly terrifying when you think about the potential. Surume. This kraken is 300 meters long. To give you a sense of scale, the Thousand Sunny can sit on his head like a tiny hat. Wadatsumi, that 80-meter fishman we just talked about who was already enormous, looks small compared to Surume. This creature is so massive that when ships encounter him in the deep ocean, they don't even register what they're looking at until it's too late. Surume was originally known as the Monster of the Arctic. Hody Jones had to travel all the way to the North Pole specifically to capture this thing, and even then, he couldn't control Surume through force. He had to take Surume's family hostage just to make him cooperate. The destruction Surume can cause is terrifying. His tentacles are long enough that a single swipe can crush multiple ships at once. He destroyed a vessel larger than the Thousand Sunny without putting in any effort whatsoever. When he fought Wadatsumi, who we established was already incredibly powerful, What makes Surume even more dangerous is his regeneration ability. Like a normal octopus, he can regrow severed tentacles, but his healing factor works incredibly fast. Zoro sliced one of his tentacles into strips during their first encounter, and by the time Luffy tamed him, all his tentacles were completely intact again. This means even if you manage to injure him, which is already difficult given his size and strength, he'll just heal and come back at full power. The interesting part of Surume's story is that Luffy managed to tame him basically through kindness and understanding. Once Luffy freed his family, Surume immediately switched sides and became loyal to the Straw Hats. Some people think this makes him look weak or pathetic, but honestly, if you had the choice between serving someone who threatens your family versus someone who actually saves them, the decision is pretty obvious. Laboon. Now we're getting into something truly special with Laboon. This island whale is 400 meters tall. He is comparable in size to the sea kings that live in the calm belt, those massive creatures that make normal ships look like toys. His eye alone is several times larger than the entire Going Merry. When the Straw Hats first encountered him, they weren't looking at a whale. They were looking at what they thought was an island until it moved. Despite being this massive, terrifying creature that could easily destroy entire fleets, he's actually been waiting at the entrance of the Grand Line for 50 years because he made a promise to friends who will never return. The Rumbar pirates, who befriended him when he was just a baby, had to leave him behind because the Grand Line was too dangerous. They promised they'd come back, so Laboon has spent half a century sitting at the entrance, ramming his head against the Red Line hoping to break through and find them. Here's where the scale of Laboon becomes even more insane. His interior is so massive that Crocus, the lighthouse keeper, installed an entire network of metal chambers and tunnels inside him. We're talking about a complex system that can catch ships. Laboon swallows, process them through his body, and eject them out through his blowhole. There's literally an artificial island inside his stomach with a cabin where Crocus lives. The ceiling of this stomach chamber is painted to look like the sky and somehow produces its own light. Laboon's body is so enormous that a full-sized island with buildings can fit comfortably inside him with room to spare. Island Eater. This thing is 715 meters tall. Yes, you heard that right. A goldfish. This creature looks like something you'd win at a carnival, except it's big enough to swallow entire islands whole, which is exactly how it got its name. The Island Eater lived near Little Garden, and it was the reason ships that left that island never made it to their next destination. They didn't sink in storms or get attacked by pirates. They just disappeared because this massive goldfish would swim up and eat them in one bite. The truly disgusting part is that its feces were so enormous that they formed their own landmass known as Nanamonai Island. This fish's droppings were large enough to be mistaken for actual islands. That's the kind of biological horror we're dealing with here. What makes the Island Eater's story interesting is how quickly it was dealt with. Dory and Brogy, the two giant warriors from Little Garden, took it down together without much effort. This has led to a lot of debate about whether the Island Eater was actually weak, or if the giants are just that much stronger than people give them credit for. Sea Kings. We need to talk about Sea Kings, because these creatures represent something fundamentally different from everything we've covered so far. The largest Sea Kings are over 5,000 meters in size. That's more than 3 miles of living, breathing, oceanic predator. These things dwarf entire cities and islands. When you see a Sea King on screen, you're not looking at an animal. You're looking at a moving geographic feature that happens to be alive and wants to eat you. Here's what makes Sea Kings absolutely terrifying from a world-building perspective. They're everywhere. They inhabit all the world's oceans, but they're especially concentrated in the calm belts, those strips of ocean that run parallel to the Grand Line. This means that the calm belts, which already have no wind or currents making them nearly impossible to cross with normal sailing ships, are also infested with the most dangerous predators on the planet. Islands near the calm belt have been completely cut off from the rest of the world because nobody can get past the Sea Kings. That's not just a navigation hazard, that's an entire civilization-ending problem. The size variation among Sea Kings is genuinely insane. The smallest one we've seen, the Lord of the Coast that ate Shank's arm, can swallow a grown man whole. That's the small one. Frankie's early battleship killed one that was roughly 100 meters long, and that was considered a massive achievement at the time. The largest specimens are so big that they make islands look tiny by comparison. Every single Sea King has a completely different appearance, different proportions, different colors, and we don't even know if they're separate species or just massive genetic variation within the same species. What really sets sea kings apart is their aggression and power level. These creatures attack unprovoked with zero fear. They don't run from ships or avoid conflict. They actively hunt anything that enters their territory. And confronting one is considered outright suicide unless you're exceptionally strong. Even Jinbe, a fishman who can breathe underwater and communicate with sea creatures, acknowledged how dangerous they are. When someone like Frankie kills a sea king, it's seen as a legitimate achievement that proves their strength, because most people who try to fight one simply die. The Marines found a workaround by coating their ships in sea stone, which tricks sea kings into thinking the ship is just part of the ocean. But even that doesn't work forever. Vice Admiral Mamanga mentioned that sea kings eventually figure it out and attack anyway. There's no permanent solution to dealing with them, except being strong enough to fight them off or fast enough to outrun them. Now here's where the lore gets absolutely wild. According to legend, once every few centuries, a mermaid is born with the ability to communicate with and command sea kings. That mermaid is called Poseidon, and she's classified as one of the 3 ancient weapons alongside Pluton and Uranus. The fact that controlling sea kings is considered a weapon capable of destroying the world tells you everything about their true power. If these creatures were unified under one command and went on a rampage, they could sink every landmass on the planet into the ocean. That's not an exaggeration. That's literally what the ancient weapon Poseidon is capable of doing. Think about what that means for the One Piece world. The oceans are filled with creatures so powerful that if someone could control them, they could end civilization. Every time a ship crosses the calm belt or ventures into deep water, they're gambling with their lives against predators that could eat them in one bite. Zunesha. We've finally arrived at Zunesha, and this is where the concept of size in One Piece completely breaks down. This elephant is 5 kilometers tall. That's 16,404 feet, or over 3 miles. To help you grasp what that actually means, Zunesha's legs are so long that it walks on the ocean floor, while its entire upper body stays above water. We're talking about an elephant that treats the ocean like a shallow puddle. When the Straw Hats first approached Zoo, they didn't see an island on an elephant's back. They saw legs rising out of the ocean that disappeared into the clouds, and they had to sail upward along those legs for hours before reaching the top. What makes Zunesha truly incomprehensible is that this creature has been walking for over 1,000 years. It's been carrying the entire island of Zoo on its back, supporting a complete civilization with cities, forests, and the mink tribe, and it has never stopped moving. The level of endurance required to walk continuously for a millennium while bearing the weight of an island is something that shouldn't be biologically possible, and yet Zunesha does it as punishment for a crime it committed 800 years ago during the Void Century. The connection to Joy Boy is one of the most significant pieces of lore in the entire series. Zunesha was affiliated with Joy Boy, the mysterious figure whose will has driven the entire plot of One Piece, and whatever crime Zunesha committed was severe enough that it has been condemned to this endless wandering for centuries. The elephant cannot act on its own. It can only walk and wait for orders from someone with the voice of all things, which means for 800 years it has been unable to defend itself or the people living on its back until someone like Luffy or Momonosuke gives it permission. Despite being forced into this passive state, Zunesha's combat abilities are absolutely devastating when unleashed. It can suck up massive amounts of seawater through its trunk and expel it with enough force to create tidal waves. When Jack and his fleet from the Beast's pirates attacked Zoo, Momonosuke gave Zunesha permission to defend itself, and with a single swing of its trunk, Zunesha obliterated Jack's entire fleet. We're talking about ships being swatted out of existence like insects. Jack, an all-star of Kaido's crew who had a bounty of 1 billion berries, was taken out in one hit. That's the difference between even a top-tier commander and something operating on Zunesha's scale of power. The tragedy of Zunesha's existence is that it possesses this incredible strength and has lived for over 1,000 years, witnessing the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Yet it cannot use any of that power or knowledge unless someone tells it to. It walks the ocean alone, carrying the weight of its crime and the responsibility of protecting the minks, waiting for the day when someone connected to Joy Boy's will can finally free it from this punishment. Some fans think Zunesha is overpowered and that its one shot of Jack was too easy. But when you consider that this is a creature that has been holding back for 800 years, do you really think we've seen anywhere close to its full potential? The Florian Triangle entities. Before we wrap up, we need to talk about something that keeps me up at night: the Florian Triangle. Over 100 ships disappear in this area every year, and while some of those vanished because of Gecko Moria and Thriller Bark, ships were disappearing long before Moria ever showed up. Something else lives in that fog, and we have almost no information about what it actually is. What we do know is genuinely horrifying. There are massive entities lurking in the Florian Triangle with glowing red eyes, and they're big enough to make Thriller Bark, an island-sized ship, look tiny by comparison. Think about everything we've talked about in this video. We've covered creatures that are hundreds of meters tall, sea kings over 5 kilometers long, and Zunesha at 5 kilometers tall. Whatever is hiding in the Florian Triangle is large enough to dwarf an island-sized ship, which means we're potentially looking at something that rivals or exceeds even the largest sea kings we've seen. The most unsettling part is that despite their enormous size, these creatures can hide completely within the fog. Charlotte Lola barely caught a glimpse of them through the mist, and that was pure luck. How does something that massive stay hidden? What are they doing in there? Why haven't they left the Florian Triangle? And most importantly, if Oda introduced them this early in the story and still hasn't explained what they are after all these years, what does that say about their importance to the endgame? Here's what I want you to think about. We're in the final saga now, and Oda has been setting up mysteries for over 2 decades. The Florian Triangle entities were shown way back during Thriller Bark, and we still don't have answers. Do you think these creatures are connected to the Ancient Kingdom, the Void Century, or maybe even the world-sinking prophecy? Or is Oda just going to leave this as one of the great unexplained mysteries of One Piece? Drop your theories in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think is hiding in that fog. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.